Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you get a chance to watch this. This is Comic Cuts, my video blog for the 10th of July, 2020, week 16 of the lockdown, and I think the 14th or so video that we've done. I must admit I'm starting to lose count a little bit because one day and 1 week is very much like the last. I actually have some news of how the books are progressing. The last 2 weeks I've been able to really push the books forward, and I now have both volumes laid out. I need to do a little bit of trimming at the end of the books, but each book consists of an introduction, the main bulk of the pages, which are 112 and 115 pages respectively. There's a little bonus strip called Along Indian Trails. Each volume will have 5 pages of those. It was a half-page strip, so each volume has 10 episodes, amounting to 5 pages apiece. At the back, the artist bios. When I dropped these into place, they ran to about 8 pages per volume, which is ludicrous. So I'm trimming those back slightly, and I'm hoping to include a little illustration with each bio. But I don't really want them to run more than 5 or 6 pages. It's just too much. It starts to push the page count up and therefore the cost of the printing. I'm hoping that I can get the books out at $13.99 plus P&P. That's the way it's looking at the moment. I'm very pleased about that. It makes the books reasonably affordable, and I hope that people will be able to afford both volumes as a unit. As I said last week, what I'll try and do is offer a little bit of a discount. Certainly I can combine postage costs, and that will save everyone a little bit of money, which in these difficult times is good news, and I'm sure we could all do with a little bit of that. I've been concentrating almost solely on the 2 Longbow volumes, which hasn't really left a great deal of time for anything else. However, I did take the weekend off. I had a very nice day just pottering around on Saturday, not really doing anything, catching up on a bit of reading, catching up on some emails. And then on Sunday, I wrote a short piece that I intend publishing with the next project. I've slowly been building up a small amount of material for the first couple of issues of what I hope will be it's either a magazine or a bookazine. I think that's the current terminology. A bookazine is something that's slightly larger than a magazine and kind of concentrates on one subject, which is a thing that I'm thinking about doing with this next project. That's not to say that every issue would be a unique subject. I'm hoping that there will be some extra articles and extra material in each issue so that it has more of a feel of a magazine rather than a book. There's a couple of things that I've written in the past that I've not really had a place to publish them. So I'm hoping to use up some of that material. Some of it dates back to 1990, way back in the dim and distant past, 30 years ago. I did a little booklet called The Mike Weston Story. I've always intended reissuing that little booklet, but in a way with a lot more information and vastly expanded. And this may be a way of doing that. It's a project that I've come to and then stepped back from through no fault of the project. It's always been a case of I've needed to go away and earn some money. Which is, that's my life, so I stumble along publishing books for a little while, and then I have to go away, earn some money, and once I've actually built up a little stock of cash that I can live on for, say, a year, I can go and write some more books, which is how Bear Alley Books has managed to produce 35 books, I think, 36 books maybe. It's an imperfect publishing model, but I've managed to keep publishing since 2011, so we're coming up for our 10th anniversary next year, and I may even have reached 40 books by then. So I think that's that it means that this way of doing it has at least some benefits, and there is something positive that's come out of it. So that's one project. I have another long piece that I wrote many years ago on how Italian artists started working in British comics back in 1954. So this may well be the place for that. I put together some material back in 2009 when I had hopes of publishing Johnny Future. Now, of course, Rebellion have done a marvellous job on their Johnny Future reprint, but I don't want to see the work that I did go to waste. So what I might do is adapt it slightly so that it becomes more of a celebration of the artist Louis Bermeo than specifically about Johnny Future. So Johnny Future would be a part of it, but also back in 2011 I wrote an article about John Steele, also drawn by Louis Bermeo, and it would be nice to put that, the stuff about Johnny Future, and maybe put those together with some other material about strips that Bermeo has drawn, along with some biographical material about the artist. That might be the first issue. I've got other material because I don't want to just cover 1950s, 1960s. I'm very aware that the market these days is very much younger than I am, and the bulk of interest might well be the 1970s and 1980s. So I'm looking for some material about the 1970s, 1980s comics, Roy the Rover's Eagle, Warlord, Battle Picture Weekly, Action, 2000 AD, of course. I have written about these things in the past, and I have researched Battle quite extensively. So there may well be some articles covering those aspects. There are certainly a lot of artists whose work I greatly admire from those years, from 1977 onwards, who have been brought up through 2000 AD, who might not have appeared in any other British comic. So certainly that would be an area that I would love to look into. A lot of it is simply down to time. There are articles that I wish I'd written, but I've just never had the time to do it. What I might be able to do also is go back through the archive of material that I built up while I was editing Comic World back in the 1990s. I did some interviews there with a lot of people, and I've kept almost everything. The one thing that I couldn't keep were the audio tapes. The audio tapes were quite expensive at the time, so I reused them. And it's to my great shame that I recorded over interviews and conversations that I had with people like Eric Bradbury. However, what I did do is I wrote quite extensive transcriptions of all of this material. So they still exist. They are in folders, which you can't see. They're actually sitting up on the shelves behind me. So I may go back into those. I've got material on the original Eagle that I've written in the past, quite an extensive article about Alan Stranks, for instance, which I would love to see in print again. It did appear many, many years ago in a non-comic magazine, so very few people will have seen it. I've written about Charles Chilton in the past, so there's plenty of material there. I'd like to write some new material about stuff from the 70s, and obviously I'm more than happy to invite other people to come in and write some material for the magazine as well. I don't want it to simply be my voice throughout the whole magazine. Obviously that's a sort of one-take view of British comics. It would be interesting to get some other views, some reviews in there perhaps, some short articles, a few hundred words, that would fill a page with a couple of illustrations. It would be nice to cover as broad a spectrum as I can. I'd like to see some short articles about the material dating all the way back to the 19th century. I suspect the bulk of the material will date from the 1950s through to maybe 2000. I've always said, as I've compiled information for the various books that I've written, they've all fallen into this vast network of a project that I called From Dan Dare to Judge Dredd, although the project itself starts earlier than Dandare and leads up to Dandare and projects beyond Judge Dredd. But that's always been the area that I've been interested in, and hopefully this new project, we can actually start looking at a lot of different areas rather than concentrating on a single title, rather than concentrating on a single area. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to actually sitting down and seeing what material I've got, and asking a few people if they are willing to contribute something. There's one or two people I've already mentioned this to, so I'm hoping that they'll come up with some ideas. And one quite well-known artist I mentioned a project to, and he seemed to be keen perhaps the wrong word, because it might involve digging up some strips from his past that he might not be quite so proud of as his later work. But there you go. That's something to look forward to, I hope. What I'm going to do is get back to the biographies now, and then sit down, edit this down into some form of listenability. I hope that you're staying safe in these days of easing of the lockdown. Staying distant is still the best advice. Staying 2 meters apart. Wearing a mask if you have to travel on public transport, wearing a mask if you have to go into a building that is not recognising social distancing, certainly in pubs. Once you've had a few pints, I'm sure that people will start forgetting that 2 meters is best for them, and even the government's recommendation of 1 meter plus. 1 meter plus what? Well, why not make it 1 meter plus 1 meter? That seems a sensible solution to the government's advice. Hopefully next week I'll have some more news on the magazine, and hopefully I'll be able to say that the 2 Longbow books are out to proof. I get printed proofs for every book, just to make sure that the printing works okay. At the moment it's taking about 2 weeks to get a printed proof back, so hopefully I can sit down and work on the magazine, and in turn hopefully that means that by next week I'll have more of a firm idea of what we'll be looking at for the first issue or two. Okay, I think that's all. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you again next week. All right, bye. Bye.